guys. Here we are. We are live. I hope we are live. So, like to welcome our guest for tonight, Tasmania's Mr. Boxing, Grant Tassie Brown. How are you, mate?
How are you, Lyndon? How are you? Good to have you. Good to be back here again, mate.
Oh, looking good. We've also got Peter Maniatis, agent. Promoter, manager, commentator, an all-round good bloke. So welcome, Pete.
No, great to be on the show, Lyndon.
And I've got to get this right, Mike. So international agent, manager, scout, and walking boxing encyclopedia.
I also second that Peter Maniatis is a good bloke. Thanks for having me, mate.
I'll vouch for both of you guys as good blokes, and the bloke up in the corner is not too bad either.
Good stuff. All right, boys. Well, tonight after last week's effort, I think I'd like to thank everyone for the the positive feedback. I thought it was really good to see everyone and to get that feedback from I mean, it was a little bit long, let's face it, but I really wanted to set the groundwork, or set the bar for us going forward and what we're going to do. So I hope everyone's had a chance to actually watch the first episode. It was pretty tough. I think we did okay. I had a few little comments back about a few of the tips, but I think overall it was good. And I think we obviously can all agree that Lionel Rose and Jeff Fennick are the two best pound-for-pound fighters Australia has produced. So I think what it did, though, was actually highlight just the amount of great fighters that Australian boxing's had over the years, and to see the disparity amongst all our lists and everything. I know the top probably 4 or 5 are very similar, but I thought it was really good to have that bottom 5 all a little bit different. And it's it's interesting how everyone sort of perceives it in different ways. But tonight, we probably dive a little bit deeper, although I think, speaking to you guys before, it's actually a little bit easier to do the all-time pound-for-pound top 10, and it's interesting. I've got all the lists myself, but I know you guys haven't seen each other, so really interesting to hear your reactions to each other's lists. So we're going to go a little bit different tonight. We're going to go in reverse. So tonight, Mike, you're going to kick us off, followed by Peter, and then Tassie, and then I will round us off. So, Mike, are you all set to go there, mate?
I'm ready to rock. I'm looking forward to creating more controversy this week.
I bet you are. All right. Well, all right. So, sorry, that's Peter. We'll go to Mike instead, I think, here. Get him. We don't want Pete taking too much time up from Mike. All right, mate. Is there any criteria you've thrown in this week, or you've just gone straight off the bat? We're going to go for the top 10 of all time, because I think Tassie, you've got a little bit of criteria amongst yours. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
No, just straight out. I mean, like I said last week, I think with anything, when you look at things historically, context matters. So again, you're going to see that noted. Does that maybe slightly favour the fighters historically who fought in different eras? Yeah, probably. But I think it's deserved acclaim and deserved appraisal. So
good.
We'll get there step by step. I'm sure we're going to bump heads on a few different points, but I'm confident in my list.
All right. Well, I'm sure when Tassie Brown's involved, there's going to be some robust discussion. So why don't you kick it off, mate, with the number 10 all-time greatest pound-for-pound fighter?
Number 10 of all time, he says he's TBE. I rank him at number 10. Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think that, why is he on this list? 5-division world champion. You look at the fighters he's beaten, 24-0 against fellow world titleists. I think that's a justification. Now, the thing is with Floyd, a fight that people long forgotten. To me, I think the most impressive win on his record, not say his most impressive performance, not his most notable, the most impressive win on his record to me was his first world title belt. He was the underdog against Gennaro Hernandez, long reigning world champion, 40 bouts, only defeat was a broken nose, TKO 6 stoppage to Oscar De La Hoya. And Floyd Mayweather, within a week shy of turning professional after the 96 Olympics, dominated him, dismantled him, stopped him late. I think that if you want to go and watch vintage pretty boy Floyd Mayweather, That's a fight to look up. But then you look at the rest of his resume, it's a who's who. And probably with the exception of, say, other fights at 130 pounds, which maybe could have been taken at the time, but rival promoters, say with Acelino Freitas, Yoel Casamayor, he fought the best of the best that were available in every weight class. He never fought Kostya Tszyu at 140, but he defeated Ricky Hatton, who had just beaten Tszyu. Yeah. So you look at that, that's kind of equalising that move there. 147, he fought everyone available, moved up to 154, beat Canelo, a future great, beat Canelo. Okay, it was a catchweight 152 pounds, but Floyd really, if you look at his body structure, was only ever 140-pound fighter maximum. Started at 130, probably even peaked at 135. So anyone that he beat above 135, he was defeating at an unnatural weight. And a lot of times, like, once his reflexes started to slow down, he adjusted his style. And he did it superbly. Is why he retired at 50-0. Greatest boxing businessman of the modern generation, and a deserved great.
No, very, very good, mate. All right, let's go to number 9, which is
the great Benny Leonard. To me, Benny Leonard, and you see the record there. So the record there is, 89-6, 70 knockouts, and you think he's a puncher. He wasn't that big a puncher. He was more an adept mover. So back in, essentially through to, say, the late 20s, a lot of reigning world champions or top-tier contenders would make a gentleman's agreement when they fought each other that if the bout didn't end by knockout, then it would be ruled a no decision. So Benny Leonard actually, if you look at his, and what would happen back then is, even though it was a no decision, the newspapers would render their own decision. The writers would congregate and it would be an unofficial. So unofficially, he's actually like 186 wins, 22 losses, 8 draws in that era. So his volume of fighting is much greater than his record reflects. He was actually a master technician, very speedy, very skillful. So a lot of fights that he dominated aren't attributed on his official record, because the official record was only attributing knockouts once he got to a certain level. But a lightweight world champion, 1917 to 1925, only loss in that period to Jack Britton, only definitive loss, I should say, to Jack Britton, reigning world welterweight champion, on a disqualification. So he drops Britton, gets disqualified, hitting him when he's down in the 13th round. He was a dominant force at the weight. To me, the second greatest lightweight of all time. And that makes him a deserved factor to be number 9 on this list.
Yeah, no, very hard to argue with that, mate. All right, let's go to number 8, which is
another guy who tells us he's the greatest, and he is, in the respect that the greatest activist. I think the greatest impact player in the history of the sport. The only guy anywhere near him is the great Joe Louis. But Ali, greatest impact as a fighter, outstanding, number 2 on my all-time heavyweight list. I think that, look, I don't need to sell anybody on Muhammad Ali. That's the one fighter that you can ask anyone in the universe, even if they're a non-boxing fan, and they know of Ali's back. But what I'll say is this. Ali, either when he was defeated or when there was any sign of controversy, never once hesitated at the sight of a rematch. Henry Cooper, there was the first time Cooper rocked him. There was a controversy over the glove. A couple of years later, rematches, mantles him. Ken Norton breaks Ali's jaw. Ali turns around and fights him his next bout. That, to me, is a sign of greatness. That's what drove him. That was the competitive greatness that drove him throughout his career. And again, another deserved guy on this list. I know a lot of other people might have him marginally higher, but I think that they'll be measuring the greatness of Ali's ability to transcend the sport rather than as a fighter. As a fighter, number 8 of all time, all weight classes, pound for pound, it's pretty damn good.
Yeah, exactly, mate. All right, moving on to number 7.
Now, I know Tazzy Brown will like this one, Sugar Ray Leonard. I think that Sugar Ray's probably got the lightest numbers on this list at 40 career fights, but it's incredible to think how much he jammed into that time as a professional. You look at the guys that Leonard beat. Leonard, at 23 years of age, took the world title in 1979, WBC 147-pound world title from 21-year-old Wilfredo Benitez, who was 38-0-1 at the time. Benitez, future world champion as well at 154. Great fighter. Leonard stops him with 5 seconds ago in round 15. Had dominated the latter stages of that fight, though. That's how you define greatness. Then goes up a weight class. Oh, let me get back to one thing. Loses to Duran, comes back, avenges against Duran. Goes up a weight class and beats Ayub Kalule, very, very underrated world champion out of Uganda, 154. Comes back and beats, and I know I'm slightly biased, to me it's the greatest welterweight fighter of all time. Beats an undefeated Thomas Hearns, outlasting him, 14th round stoppage. Then you look at that, he had eye problems, 3-year layoff, comes back, 3-year layoff. This is not a guy, we live in an era where every fighter wants a tune-up for a tune-up that leads to another tune-up. 3-year layoff, this guy goes against the biggest, baddest middleweight of his era in Marvin Haggler, and I know that people will talk about controversy regarding the decision, and to me, Leonard comfortably outboxed him. I thought that Leonard knew when to flurry, knew when to let his hands go, and I thought that that was the difference in the fight. Post-Hagler, wins another 2 world championships, 168, 175, 5-division world champion, one of the greatest of all time, without question.
Yep, I think Tassie agrees with that one. All right, we'll go to number 6.
The defensive master, Willie Pep, greatest defensive fighter of all time in my book. Now, again, and this is where context matters. Actually, and those numbers are incorrect on Pep. Is 229, 11, and 1 from memory, his record.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's wrong, Lyndon. That's
Sorry. There's a big
way
cross.
low on Willie, brother.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Willie's rocking in his grave right now.
Sorry about that.
He won about that many fights in a 12-month period. Come on.
Mate, he done that in 3 weeks, mate. Come on, Lyndon.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what I've done there, so sorry about that. We'll just put a cross against his record there. Sorry, guys. We'll get it right.
Put a question mark against that. But this is a man who started his career 134 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. Who does that? He was the champ, the world champ at featherweight from 1942 to 1948. Gets knocked out in 4 rounds by the great Sandy Sadler. Had a series of fights. He only beat Sandy Sadler once, but guess what? Gets knocked out in the 4th round. 3 months later, avenges that loss, 15-round decision. If that's not good enough for you, he had 2 tune-up fights. Got knocked out, had 2 tune-up fights, and still rolled into avenging that loss 3 months later. How can you compare this to the modern era? Willie Pep, like I said, greatest defensive fighter of all time for my book. You judge fighters by his prime. Best featherweight of all time. Definitely, I feel confident in saying he's at least should be number 6 historically.
I think I actually read once that he won a round without throwing a punch. Is that right?
That's correct, Lyndon. He did.
Yeah, that's the wisdom. Yeah, that's a convention. Whether he did or didn't, whether he feinted a few shots, but that's always been the narrative.
Yeah.
That's
Very good,
history,
mate.
yeah.
All right, we'll move on to number 5.
That's the right record. See, Joe Louis, you got the right record for Joe Louis.
Sorry about that.
Heavyweight record of 25 world title defenses, 12-year reign from 1937 1949. His reign was greatly affected by World War II. People talk about, Joe Louis, people talk about with his defenses that he had the bum of the month club he was fighting. You know, guys undeserved, whatever. The reason there was a bum of the month is because the previous decade he cleaned out the whole weight class. You can't punish a guy for his success. You know, you look at prior to winning the world title, he wrecked Jack Sharkey, he wrecked Max Baer, he wrecked Primo Carnera. That's 3 former world champions. Not many guys do that in their era. First loss to Max Schmeling, come back after rolling a whole heap of wins, knocks out James J. Braddock for the world title. In the most important fight in boxing history, annihilates Schmeling in round 1. American versus a German in the midst of World War II erupting. Most significant fight to me, most significant fight in boxing history, period. one of the most significant sporting moments of the 20th century. And it's crazy that in this day and age, people forget the accomplishments of Joe Louis. Like I said, Ali being second of all time in my heavyweight rankings isn't because I'm underestimating Ali. It's that I'm giving the appropriate acclaim to Joe Louis. I think that, Joe Louis, he did beat a lot of smaller guys, Billy Conn, fighters of that nature that were great light heavyweights, but he also cleared out every available heavyweight from multiple eras. You have to respect that.
Yeah, very, very good argument, mate, and no doubt, one of the greatest of all time. So we're now into the top four.
Number
very
4.
Interested to hear about this fellow. It is
The great Harry Greb. And again, those numbers there don't really reflect the records. So 108, 8-3 officially. Unofficially, newspaper rulings, 299 fights, 262 wins, 18 losses, 18 draws. That's essentially 200 fights that happen that aren't attributed historically because they didn't have a result. But that reflects you the kind of activity of guys in this era. So, all right. So why is he there? 1923 middleweight world title victory over Johnny Wilson, but dial back a bit earlier. A year earlier, defeats, and I know he lost to this guy multiple times later. Defeats a future world champion Gene Tunney for the American light heavyweight world title. This is a middleweight beating the future heavyweight world champion who in 67 bouts only ever lost that fight. So you've got to look historically and look pound for pound. We're talking pound for pound. You have to respect that. He beat Tommy Loughran, future world light heavyweight champion, twice. Mickey Walker, arguably the other greatest fighter of that era. He beat Mickey Walker. I know Mickey Walker was a reigning welterweight champ. Good for Harry Greb. For once, someone's moving up to his weight class and he's not needing to give away size. He beat all the top available heavyweight contenders in that era. And here's the craziest part, Lyndon. From 1921 onwards, he had skewed vision in his right eye. So all these wins in his prime come essentially when he was blind in one eye. It's outrageous what this guy accomplished despite that ailment.
Yeah, no, certainly. I don't know whether that's shadow boxing or dancing there, but geez, as a fighter, what a record, unbelievable. I actually did a bit of research. I knew a bit about Harry Greb, obviously, but actually do a little bit more research. It's amazing, the record he had and the fighters he had and the titles that he won. So, yeah, very good, mate. All right, well, that makes us go on to our top three. And I think everyone's going to love this guy. It is
Manos de Pedra, hands of stone, Roberto Duran. And I think that Duran's another one that sometimes people, and he accomplished great things amongst the Four Kings. The Four Kings being Duran, Leonard, Hearns, Hagler, for people that don't know. But that was all post-prime. When you look at anything that Duran accomplished from 1980 onwards, effectively it's all post-prime. In his prime, absolute animal. I mean, 1972, he beats the great Scotsman Ken Buchanan for the WBA world title, lightweight world title. Shockingly loses in a non-title fight against Esteban de Jesus.
great fight.
However, twice avenges against de Jesus, and that's not a bad loss. De Jesus became the WBC lightweight world champion. The late 70s unification bout. Duran beats him for the third time in their rubber match. But two other things happened in the 70s too. So you want to talk about great fighters he beat. He beat Hector Thompson, one of Australia's finest, but also amongst that era in the 70s, he beats, if you look who else, he beats Guts Ishimatsu, he beats Sal Mambi. These are future lightweight world champions too. When he's the dominant fighter in that era, there's only two lightweight world title bouts. There's the WBA and the WBC. He's beaten in his reign as WBA world champion 3 future WBC lightweight world champions. So effectively, he rules the weight class for 8 years. Steps up 2 weight classes, doesn't go to 140 like I guess your mortal would. Steps up 2 weight classes, shocks Sugar Ray Leonard, welterweight world champion. I mean, that alone is, a top 10 worthy accomplishment at that time. Yeah, has a no-mask fight against Leonard, loses in the rematch to Leonard. Has a couple of different performances, more because of lifestyle. In 1983, everyone declaring the man is completely shot over the hill. He's a 5 American champion, world champion at junior middleweight. Dominates Moore, stops him in the 8th round. Rolls out of that fight, gives Marvin Haggler, reigning middleweight world champion. You got to think, this is a little lightweight. This is a little Panamanian lightweight. Gives Marvin Haggler one of his toughest technical battles over 15 rounds. Go back and watch it. That's an 8-7, 9-6 kind of fight. Again, everyone, few indifferent performances, everyone reading Duran his last rites. Comes back 1989, shocks Iran Barkley for the middleweight world title. Man's incredible. What he achieved post-prime is Hall of Fame worthy. That's how great he is.
Yep, I hear you, mate. All right, well, that brings us to your top 2. And here we go. Then your number 2 pick is...
I don't think my number 2 is causing controversy like it did last week. But
No.
This is the great Henry Armstrong. In an era with 8 weight classes, simultaneously he was a world champion in 3, and he was shafted of being 4 when he was given a dud 10-round raw decision against middleweight champ Seferino Garcia. Now you see here with Armstrong, you look at this footage, looks a little unorthodox. It is. He never looked at his opponents in the eyes. He actually followed them by their feet. He was a deceiving pressure fighter. You see, he uses his shoulder on the inside, push off, create angles, relentless, frenetic puncher. Now, the crazy thing with Armstrong is this. 3 amateur fights, got knocked out on debut. You guys know, usually a guy gets knocked out on debut. He's a journeyman or he never fights again. Come back to be world champion. You want to hear something else ridiculous about him? 1937, he goes 27-0 and captures the featherweight world title to culminate that year. Who goes 27-0 in 1 year? We've got world champions in this era who pro 10, 12 years that don't have 27 fights. That's why he deserves to be number 2 on this list.
Yep, good call, mate. All right, there's the great Henry Armstrong. That's a unbelievable record there by the looks of things too, but it's amazing. All right, mate, so that brings us to the number 1. Let's check it out, and it is, drum roll.
Can only be sweet as sugar. The great Sugar Ray Robinson. To me, this is the biggest no-brain argument of all time. So if any of you guys have anybody else placed as number 1, I'm coming for you tonight. I'm
usually shit about
mellow with these discussions. But, and I'll give you the reason why. I know you guys will elaborate on this, but you look.
It's got to be after 9 p.m.
You showed his record: 174 wins, 19 losses. Guess what? He started his career 129 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. He actually, before that, he was 40-0 to 1943. From 1943 to 1951, right? Think about it. 8-year period. He has 93 bouts. This is in his prime as a reigning world champion. His next loss that comes in 51 to Randolph Turpin. Think about this. He goes on a tour of Europe, has 7 fights in 6.5 weeks. In the final bout of that expedition, he gets shocked by Turpin, takes his time, goes back home, catches his breath. 3 months later, comes back and knocks out Turpin. He has a 3-year layoff after losing, steps up to light heavyweight, passes out due to heat exhaustion, loses due to heat exhaustion against Joey Maxim. 3-year layoff, that's the only stoppage of his career, by the way. 3-year layoff, comes back, captures the middleweight world title. Professional for 25 years, 1940 to 1965. In his 23rd year as professional, when anyone that knows the sport will say that he was well past his prime. They'll even say he was shot to the high heavens, he wasn't the same fighter anymore. He was still good enough to beat Ralph Dupas, who in his next fight won the world junior middleweight world title. There's no argument. I mean, you can go and pluck any fight out of Robinson's career after his 15th, 20th bout, and he's fighting elite competition. It's incredible what this guy accomplished, and it's a shame sometimes that people forget. You hear people in this era talk about Mayweather or fighters of that ilk, and they haven't heard of someone like Robinson. Robinson's a guy that should be remembered for eternity for how great he was.
Spot on, mate. I think not giving too much away, but I think he's pretty high on everyone's list, to be honest. So, all right, mate. Well, let's go to your overall top 10. I just want to quickly run through from 10 down to 1.
Yep. So Sugar Ray Robinson. Oh, we're starting at 10. I almost
start at
changed
10.
my own list.
Yep.
Floyd Mayweather Jr., 9, Benny Leonard, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Willie Pep, Joe Louis, Harry Greb, Roberto Duran, Henry Armstrong, and pound for pound, Sugar Ray Robinson.
Great list, mate. All right, guys. Some feedback there.
Great list, Mike. I won't give too much away, but kind of similar to my list in parts. Some of the guys you mentioned, like Greb, obviously Pep, Leonard, just legends of the game, and they deserve all the praise you gave them. Obviously, Armstrong, it's a great list, mate. I can't fault. It's not exactly the same as mine, but it's similar, and obviously it's just boxing history. Like it's legends of the game that you couldn't not mention.
Yeah, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's a good historical list. You can't go wrong with it. A lot of homework, Mike, and I'm every single one of those guys. What can you say? They're all legends, and they've all done their massive contributions at different times to the sport. So yeah, it's a terrific list.
Yeah, no, from me too, mate. I think it's very well researched. I wouldn't have expected anything less from you with all that information about the Willie Peps and Harry Grebs of the world. So, very, very good list. So, I'd be interested to hear if anyone's got any comments out there to put them in or some feedback.
There's like a few people I wouldn't have in certain spots here, Mike. But I mean, that's your choice. You know what I mean? But like great list. But yeah, a few probably I wouldn't have. It'd be a bit in different order, but that's what's great about it. Yeah.
Yep. No, that's awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Awesome stuff. So, which moves us on to Peter Maniatis. All right, mate. You want to kick us off with number 10? It is
Number 10, I could have tossed up with a lot of fighters, but Roy Jones, great ambassador for boxing, silver medalist, 1988 Seoul Games, was one of the reasons why they changed a lot of the rules, should have won the gold medal. Won 4 world titles in 4 different weight classes. That's massive for me. And it's super, middleweight, light heavyweight, and of course at middleweight defeated Bernard Hopkins and James Toney when they were at their peak. So this guy did everything that you have to do in a sport. He had a 29-year career, charismatic, at his best. What can you say? Fighter of the decade. Just sneaks in at number 10 for mine.
Yeah, no, very good choice, mate. All right, number 9.
Number 9, Joe Louis, 25 consecutive.
No, that's right. That is his record, isn't it?
Yeah.
25 consecutive defences when there was only one heavyweight world champion. So he beat 25 the best guys available. And he had that 12-year career, 66 wins, as we said, 3 losses. But his fight with Max Smelling was the most important because, he got a little confident and Max Smelling stopped him in the 14th round in their first fight. And in their rematch, it was just before the war and Hitler was, if you go to Max Smelling's actual box rec record, you'll see the Hitler sign up there. And he was creating war against the war. So in reality, Joe Louis wasn't fighting Max Smelling. He was fighting a fight for everyone to prove that the Germans aren't what they are. And the morning of the fight of the rematch, Joe Louis got up and he was walking with his trainer and he said to his trainer, "I'm scared today." And his trainer said, "Look, it's okay to be scared. It's a big fight." And he tapped his trainer and he said, you don't realise. He goes, "I'm not scared that way. I'm scared I'm going to actually kill Max Smelling in a ring tonight." That was the confidence of Joe Louis, and he smashed him in one round.
Yeah.
Hitler broke the transistor, flew it to the ground, went berserk, and that's the type of fight. So for mine, Joe Louis goes in at 9 and he deserved 9.
Yep. All right. Number 8.
What can you say about Sugar Ray Leonard? What a career. 20-year career, won 5 world titles. He was a lineal champion in 3 divisions. And, gold medalist at the Montreal Olympics. His fights with Duran, Hearns, and Hagler. That rematch with Marvin Haggler for mine was just what comebacks are all about. No one gave him a chance. He was coming back from an eye injury, and he just danced and danced and danced, and it was one of the magic moments for mine in the sport of boxing. So for mine, Sugar Ray Leonard deserves his chance, and of course, coming back to beat the great Roberto Duran and the no mass fight when he made Roberto Duran quit. You can't say any more than Sugar Ray Leonard. Always has to be in the top 10.
Yep, for sure, mate. All right, number 7. And I think I've got the record right this time.
Yeah, Willie Pep, what can you say? Kid Kabashi said it all when he said, fighting Willie Pep is like trying to stomp out a grass fire. You just can't do it. And 229 wins, best featherweight of all time. We saw his record. He was such a beautiful mover and impossible to combat because of his movement and his skill and his IQ. Just, a freak, really, Willie Pep. Could have been higher, but I put him in at that position.
Yep, hard to argue with that. All right, we move on to number 6.
Floyd Mayweather, maybe a touch high for Floyd, but because he's a modern day great and we keep seeing him bronze medalist in the 96 Olympics. We know you're in that Olympics, Lyndon, so you got to see him. 5-division world champion, lineal champion in 4 weight classes. Considered one of the best defensive fighters of all time. And just a money-making machine. When I think of Floyd Mayweather, I think of money because that's what it was all about to him, making money and not copping the punishment, and he gets to enjoy his money now. So he comes in at 6.
Yep, all right. Number 5.
Roberto Duran, the hands of stone, 4-division world champion, a lineal champion, lightweight and welterweight. His legend trainer was Ray Arcel. First boxer to beat Sugar Ray Leonard, and also, his victory at 72 kilo middleweight division over Iran Barkley, the WBC world title, to secure his 4-division world champion. A guy's always going to be a legend, considered the best lightweight of all time. No one could come close to Roberto Duran at lightweight. He was a simple killer and a definite top 5 for mine.
Yeah, for sure, mate. He was an absolute legend, was Roberto Duran. All right, mate, so takes us to number 4.
Homicide Hank, what can you say? This man was unbelievable. Defended his welterweight title record 19 times at the time. World featherweight champion, world lightweight champion, and world welterweight champion. Realistically, could have won 6 world titles. He's just, Louis Ambers, Bobby Pacho, Barney Ross. Defeated such great fighters. His ferocity inside the ring was unbelievable. And a lot of the old timers say he could have been a lot higher, but I've got him in at number 4.
Yeah, no, good call, mate. I think, anywhere in that top sort of 4 or 5 seems to be the mark for Henry Armstrong. All right, we move to, I'm sure, one of your favourites.
Manny Pacquiao, what can we say about this guy? The fighting centre from the Philippines, the only 8-division world champion in boxing, held 8 major world titles. First boxer to be a lineal world champion in 5 different weight classes. You listen to that. Lineal champion in 5 different weight classes. Only boxer to hold a world title in 4 different decades. Oldest welterweight champion in the history of sport. Defeated 22 world champions. Anything you want to know about Manny, and you know what freakish is about this guy? He should have won 10 world titles. He won the flyweight world title. What does he do? He skips super fly, he skips bantamweight and goes banging a super bantam. This guy should have had 10 world titles in 10 different weight classes. He's a senator. I don't think there's been any person like Manny Pacquiao in boxing. I was going to put him number 1. If he had a one on the weekend, he would have been my number 1. I waited till the weekend. But his fight with Hugh Gus was crazy. He should have been in with Errol Spence, and that's Manny Pacquiao. At 42 years of age, he wanted to fight Errol Spence, a guy that no one else wants to fight. And this guy's done so much for boxing. And there'll be never, ever be another 8-division world champion. And he should have been a 10-division world champion. So for mine, he comes in at 3, and a deserved 3.
Yeah, no, very hard to argue. Although I'm sure a couple of blokes, the guys there, might have a bit to say. But takes us number 2.
Number 2, Muhammad Ali, touted as the greatest. Look, when you look at Ali, you see those 4 years out of boxing when he didn't want to go to Vietnam. I mean, this guy dispatches Sonny Liston in 1964 to become the second ever WBC world champion. And he was under the name of Cassius Clay, changes his name, does what he has to do. But when you look at Muhammad Ali, he was involved in the 3 biggest fights of all time. And we're talking about first the fight of the century where he fought Joe Frazier, and that was, you had Frank Sinatra in row 7. He couldn't get ringside, and he had to pose as a photographer, Diana Ross in the crowd. Everyone wanted to be at Madison Square Gardens. He lost that fight, but it wasn't the end. The Rumble in the Jungle was watched by 1 billion people. He comes out, he beats George Foreman. No one gave him a chance. Everyone thought he was going to get hurt. Then, of course, the Thriller in Manila. What more can we say about this guy? He thrilled us again. He kept thrilling us, and wins a gold medal in Rome as well as an amateur. Is there anything this guy couldn't do? You could put him in any era. A lot of the heavyweights in the smaller era, like Rocky Marciano, and that sadly today wouldn't be heavyweights. Rocky Marciano could probably make light heavyweight with diets today, or cruiserweight. He wouldn't have been a heavyweight. Where Muhammad Ali, he would have still been a heavyweight. He would have built up. He had that athletic build. You could put Muhammad Ali anywhere you like, and he comes in at number 2.
All right, mate, which takes us to number 1, and probably no surprise here.
Sugar Ray Robinson, what can you say? The first man to get an entourage in boxing. He made the entourage. He's the one that made the slick moves. He always had the style. He always had the grace. 173 wins. Fought 18 world champions. His fights with Jake LaMotte and Carbon Basilio will always be legendary. And when you see Sugar Ray Robinson, you remember, the 7 or 8 left hooks done in a split second, just the movement, the style, the pizzazz. Even Muhammad Ali said he was the greatest. And just his style was, it was just something to see. He just welterweight, a middleweight world champion, and definitely the greatest of all time. There's no arguments about that from anyone.
All right, well, there's the top list, mate. Run from 10 down to 1 with a quick overview.
Roy Jones Jr., 4-division world champion, heavyweight world champion as well. Joe Lewis, the one and only. Sugar Ray Leonard, you can't say anymore. Willie Pep, defensive wizard. Floyd Mayweather, another defensive wizard who won 5 world titles in 5 different weight classes. Roberto Duran, best lightweight of all time. Henry Armstrong could have been a 6-division world champion if it was lightweight and if it was, juniors and supers in that weight class back then. Manny Pacquiao, the fighting senator, the one and only. Muhammad Ali, what can you say? Mr. Boxing, pizzazz, had it all. And Sugar Ray Leonard, they didn't come any sweeter, and he done it all in boxing and a pioneer. Some of the movement, you have to get a video and watch some of the moves of Sugar Ray Leonard, and he's just masterful and an unbelievable, talented boxer.
All right, guys, start with you, Mike. Some feedback for Pete.
Oh, look, I think where I would argue with a couple of those selections is the context of the fact that we're looking at guys that fought in eras with only 8 bouts and 1 recognised world title. Currently we're in an era where there's 17 bouts and 4 world titles, or if you're fighting for WBA, there might be 3 or 4 in one weight class. So I think that's what you have to stack up. Where I do agree with Peter, and see, my list, Pacquiao just misses a list on my side. I wouldn't argue with anyone that has him in the top 10 because of what he accomplished at certain weight classes. 135, back in the day, beating David Diaz. David Diaz isn't even a top 10 contender in the 30s. That's being honest. But you look at what he accomplished at 122, 126, beating the likes of Morales, beating Juan Manuel Marquez, beating Barrera. That's great high-level fighters. That's throwback fighters. Then you look at when he's gone up in weight and the guys that he beat. Cotto, future middleweight world champion. Pacquiao crushed him at 147, and Pacquiao was a smaller man. Crushed Haddon. Yeah, Mayweather destroyed Haddon systematically, but Pacquiao at his best annihilated him. So I I won't fault you too much on that one. The Roy Jones one, I'm the biggest Roy Jones fan out there. I see the case for him because he beat 4 future world champions off the top of my head in Eric Luca, Malinga, James Toney, and Bernard Hopkins. And Hopkins especially went on to have an outstanding career after Roy beat him. So I think on that, you can make a case. It's a shame for Roy what happened at the end of his career because a lot of people judge him on that but forget the greatness. And I might be amongst them. But I can see the case for him based on how great he was in his prime.
Has he?
Yeah, Pete, look, great list. Awesome. I mean, Manny, what a legend, mate. He's done everything. But just with Manny, so when we say he's 8 divisions, but like, if you want to get technical, I mean, Barrera might have been like the lineal, they said, but it wasn't for any of the major belts. And then Marquez was a draw. So he really didn't, I don't think he officially won the featherweight. And then later
Marquez's first fight wasn't for the draw wasn't for wasn't part of his world title though.
It wasn't. But did he actually win? I don't think the win over Barrera wasn't for one of the belt. Like, I mean, he can still, because he was lineal champion, Barrera, we can say he won.
Barrera was the lineal world champion at the time. He was the number 1 featherweight.
Yeah, but did the belts, Barrera. None of the belts were on the line, though, were they? The proper belts weren't on the line then for that fight?
He was a Ring Magazine lineal champion. I mean, that doesn't get any better.
Yeah,
for mine, that means more. That means more because anyone can manufacture an interim WBA world title. I could do it tomorrow and probably put myself in the corner if I got the same.
And we say, and the same will happen. I had this conversation with Skinny who's saying Skinny's not being biased either, but Skinny only rates him at 6 divisions, not 8. But I mean, it doesn't here or there. Look what he done in the sport. Same as the Hatton. I don't think that. I mean, Hatt was probably the lineal champion. He went back down from waterweight to junior waterweight. But yeah, look, I mean, the thing with Pacquiao, I don't think he had a definite win over Marquez. I mean, they were all the ones he had were controversial split. Then he got knocked out by him. Losses to Morales, Bradley. I mean, look, I mean, he's a legend. You can't. I mean, I'm being very technical right now, but he's obviously a legend. But I mean, there's some still.
Look, you go to Floyd Mayweather. Let's just keep it simple. You go to Floyd, okay? Floyd fights Oscar De La Hoya. Floyd doesn't win that fight for mine. It was a split decision. I scored that to Oscar. I just saw Floyd. Okay, Manny fights Oscar straight after that. It wasn't even a fight. You had to call the police. Actually, if they let it go, you might have to call a hearse. And that's how close we're talking. I mean, people don't know how good Manny Pacquiao is. Manny Pacquiao, in my opinion, from 2008 to 2011, beats everyone. Beats everyone. He hits like a heavyweight.
I think Floyd did beat Oscar, 115, 113. I thought he won it legit. Finished better later down the stretch.
So how do you compare that to what Manny did to Oscar?
Oscar weight drained down to the weight and was gone. And Freddie said to him, jump on
drained down. Come on. No, mate, there was no weight. That's just excuses. It wasn't even close, though. If you had weight drainage, well, you would have thought that it might have happened early or later in the fight. Oscar wasn't in the fight at any stage. From the round 1, you just say, where's the bookmakers? I'm heading there. And don't look back. It's like it wasn't even a fight.
I think that doesn't happen if it's a real Oscar De La Hoya in his prime. That doesn't happen. What happened then? My opinion.
He did the same with Cotto. He beat down Cotto. He beat down Hatton. He beat them all down. He made Margarito look like he got hit by a truck. And he could have knocked Margarito out. He was telling the referee, stop the fight. In the last round, he just danced around. Now, any other fighter would have went for the kill in the last round and knocked him out, but not Manny Pacquiao. That's when the true humanitarian came out, and he just looked after Margarito, so the brave warrior could go out on his shield. And, the damage that was done to Margarito's face, he never recovered. So, and the day of the fight,
that's true.
Margarito would have been 7, 8, 9 kilo heavier than Manny. So, for mine, everything that Manny did, and look, even like
Marquez.
You look at Manny now, and you think, well, He wanted to fight Errol Spence, and the guy's only 43 years
Oh,
of age.
full
How many
credit.
people do that? He's not looking around for exhibitions against KY or whatever his name is, and all the whatever his name is, KCI and all these blokes, and looking to cash in. This guy wants to fight Errol Spence. He wants to fight the best, and that's always been Manny Pacquiao. So for mine, you know, if he had a one last on the weekend, I would have him at number one. So, and you just go through every part of his career. You just it stacks up everywhere. Even his wins over, you know, let's just say Lucas Matisse, and then he fought Broner, and then he fought Thurman, just at the later part. That's enough to get you in the Hall of Fame, just about. So that's after Horn. We don't have to go beyond what happened before. So,
I think Floyd, if you match head-to-head as fighters, I think styles make fights. I think Floyd beats him pretty much 9 out of 10 times every time they fight. That's stylistic.
So you think Manny and Floyd in 2009? Do you think Floyd would have beaten?
Floyd wins. Yeah, he does.
Yeah, that's why Floyd didn't want to fight. Floyd's good at picking the right time to fight a guy, and that's where he's good at. He waits and he waits and he waits. He got Canelo Alvarez early in his career. Perfect matchmaking from Floyd. He got Manny after he got knocked out from Marquez. Was never the same. Didn't have that same fire and brim after the Marquez knockout. Floyd is the best at picking the right type of fighters. Floyd would not go near Manny in 2009, 10 and 11. He was petrified to fight Manny because most of the public would have known what would have happened if he did. That's just my view, and a lot of people agree. But nothing against Floyd, but Floyd was the best managed fighter because he controlled his own destiny. That's maybe I'm just Floyd.
Maybe I'm a bit bitter that my beautiful friend Adele was saying got the long count in the Philippines. I'm still upset over it. So maybe it's just that I love Manny, great fighter. We can't disrespect him. He's a legend, mate. And okay, Roy Jones Jr., Pete. I'd love to put Roy in. He was my childhood hero, my favourite fighter. Unlucky he didn't have some of the bigger names. He beat Hopkins, as we said, and he beat Reggie Johnson. But I think Roy was in the wrong era. He needed some maybe bigger names. I loved him. I think no one beat people as easy as Roy Jones did at his peak. He beat everyone more than Mayweather, probably more than Pacquiao. He beat everyone so easy. It made it look second rate. He played basketball the day of the fight to try and give himself some competition. Maybe we don't remember him as much through the recent years, but I'm happy you had him on there because I wanted to put him on. So that's Roy, amazing.
That's why I did it. I was going to go Carlos Monzon with 14 consecutive middleweight defenses, but I wanted to put Roy in there. I thought I wanted to be brave.
Yeah, I'm happy
Roy,
you did.
That was an Achilles heel. That was an Achilles heel of the 10.
Great list, mate. Awesome list. Well done.
Well, we could discuss it all night, I think, but at the end of the day, I thought not a bad list at all, mate. It's all open to interpretation. So, on that note, Tassie, it's now your turn, and we're going to step up.
Let's get it on. I just want to say, Mikey Altamura, make sure you're home and stay home before 9 p.m, mate. Tassie might become the Greensboro.
All right, Tassie Brown.
Whoa!
Here we go. Whoa! Number 10.
Julio Cesar Chavez. Julio. What can I say about Julio? At one stage before his first loss, he was 86-0. 3-division champion. Beats the likes of Mayweather, Roger Mayweather, Rocky Lotrick, sorry. The great. He went up for super featherweight and then become the unified lightweight champion, and then went up to junior waterweight, beats the likes of Mildred Taylor. That was like, I think he was down on the cards. 5 seconds to go on the fight, knocks Taylor out. One of the greatest fights in history when Richard Steele waved the fight off, and then beat him in a rematch again. An absolute one of the greatest, probably the greatest Mexicans of all time, and the most dominant figure pretty much. He got the Ring Magazine from 1993, he was pound for pound rated the best fighter by Ring Magazine. Beat Mario Martinez as well. Won Laporte, another Hall of Famer. And had a draw with Pernell Whitticker. And by, first lost to Frankie Randall, then he rematched Randall and beat him twice after that. Fought a prime Oscar De La Hoya and Costa Zoo, and he was past his best at those fights. But, still fighting the guys like Oscar and Costa when he was past his best. Had a draw with Michael Angel Gonzalez, again, past his best. But a prime Chavez, what do we rate him at, super feather or lightweight? Super feather, probably beats everyone in the world. Lightweight is up there with the likes of Duran. Chavez, what can you say? What a legend.
Certainly was, mate. All right, that takes us to number 9.
Former Olympic gold medalist, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitticker, one of my personal favourite fighters, was a unified lightweight champion, had all 3 belts. And then he went up and won the junior waterweight title. Then he went up and won the waterweight title. Then he went up and won the junior waterweight title. And, also ranked pound for pound at the time, the best in the world. Fought a draw with Chavez, very controversial. Everyone thought Whitticker won the fight. He beat Greg Haugen.
Embarrassed Haugen, didn't he?
So many champions that he beat. He was just one of the most beautiful defensive fighters. Like, he was so slick as a southpaw. He had decent pop on his punches. Wasn't known as a great knockout puncher, but he dropped a lot of fighters. He also beat Roger Mayweather as well. So many scalps on his list. He was unlucky against a young De La Hoya. I thought he was past his best, and I thought he was unlucky not to win that fight. The only real loss on Whitticker's record was to a prime Trinidad when he was way past his best. Apart from that, no one beat Whitticker. And out of this, that's why he's ahead of Chavez, because I believe that he won that fight. It wasn't a draw. And Pernell Whitticker's, just one of the greatest ever of all time. He's up there with my second best lightweight under Roberto Duran. Sweet Pea Whitticker.
Good stuff, mate. All right, number 8.
Hitman Thomas Hearns, the first man to win 5 titles in 5 different weight divisions. He won, I don't know, something like his first 18 or something fights by knockout. He had the biggest right hand. And he had the unified welterweight division fight against Sugar Ray Leonard for all the chocolates, and had his moments in that fight. Had Leonard hurt and gone, but like we all remember, Angelo Dundee, you're blowing it, son, you're blowing it. Leonard come back and stopped him in the 14th round. Hearns then beat future Hall of Famer Wilfredo Benitez at light middleweight. So went up and beat the great Benitez. He knocks out Roberto Duran as well. No one ever done to Duran what Hearns did. Iced him, I think, in round 2. Had the greatest 3 rounds of history against Marvin Haggler at middleweight. Obviously, he didn't win, but that's regardlessly one of the greatest fights in history. One of the wins about Hearns that I love, I think Mike will agree with me, this, he goes up and beats an undefeated Virgil Hill, who had ridiculous amount of defences at the time. So he goes up later in life and beats a young Virgil Hill at light heavyweight who was undefeated. That's one of the highlights for me. And obviously, from the Cronks gym under Emmanuel Stewart, if he hit you, he used to usually finish you. He was a great finisher. And 5 divisions, the first man to ever do it. So Hitman Tommy Hearns, arguably, that's why he's in where I've got him.
All right, mate, takes us to number 7.
Well, Mikey sort of said a lot about him already, and I'm glad you got the record right this time, Lyndon. Willie Pep.
Thank you.
He was known to win a round without throwing a punch. He was defensive, the greatest ever, 2-time heavyweight champion. I think one year he had a run of 17 wins in a row for that year. He was just an amazing fighter. Had the 4 bouts of Sandy Sadler, winning the rematch, like Mike said. Being knocked out and coming back and winning. He fought often, and he beat so many great fighters in his era. And Willie Pep is part of boxing folklore. I heard so much about him growing up as a child. And you can't have a top 10 list without having Willie Pep there, the most defensive fighter ever and the best featherweight of all time.
Well said, mate. Number 6.
Well, I feel like we just spoke about him, Roberto Duran, the greatest lightweight of all time. Where can we say? Unified the title. I think he was something like 70-something and 1 when he lost to Esteban de Jesus, who we rematched him and knocked him out after that and beat him again in the rematch. I said Luke unified the lightweight champion. He actually beat, like Mike said, 3 fighters that went on to win the WBC title. As a lightweight, he was at his best. No one would beat him. He goes up 2 divisions. He fights Sugar Ray Leonard, undefeated world champion, the big gold medalist, and beats Leonard. Loses to Inomas after that. Has a bit of a downhill, losing some fights to Tommy Hearns and a couple other guys, but then he finds his mojo, gets back, beats Davey Moore, beats Aram Barkley, and I think he ended up with 4 weight divisions and fought Hagler, like Mike said. I mean, I'm going over a lot of you guys already said before me, but he goes up as a lightweight, a little guy, and he takes the big bad Marvin Haggler to a very close fight. And I think that's one of the reasons when Leonard thought I can beat Hagler when he sees Duran goes against him. And that, to me, was like a victory to go up all them weights and to, the naturally smaller guy to fight a guy like Hagler. Roberto Duran, who's got to be in everyone's top 10. The hands of stone. What a legend.
All right, mate, number 5.
The Brown Bomber Joe Louis. Like you guys said before, he fought for more than boxing. He already beat future world champions Primo Canero, Maxi Bear, Braddock to win the title and got revenge over Schmeling and destroyed Schmeling. And Peter and Mike said before about it wasn't a boxing match. It was, America against Germany. It was versus Hitler versus everything that Schmeling stood for. And Joe Louis had the whole world on his shoulders and pulverised Schmeling, knocking him out. He done a lot in the war, and the war broke up a lot of his time, and he went over and done exhibition bouts and helped a lot of the people raise money for the troops over there. He beats Juicy Joe Walcott once on points and by knockout later in his career. He still has some good fights. A great Billy Conn. Thing with Joe Louis, if you went okay with him in the first fight, he'll cream you in the second fight. No way did you ever have the same time round twice with Joe Louis. If he had an off night, he'd get in the rematch like Conn and Jersey Joe Walcott. So what can I say? The Brown Bomber, one of the greatest of all time, and really transcended boxing for a black man back then. He fought against racism in the war. I heard he had some run-ins with a lot of the senior sergeants and people above him in the war. He stuck up. There's a lot of racism back then, and it was a shame the fact that he came back. If he didn't come back, he goes down with the one defeat. He comes back and fights Cesar Charles, Rocky Marciano, way past his best. And the reason he done it, why? The American government gave him a maxi tax bill after everything he'd done for boxing and for all the time in the war, all the free time and effort he gave in to keep the troops' spirits high in World War II. They hit him with a tax bill, which Frank Sinatra, Frank Lucas, a lot of people chipped in, a lot of celebrities loved Joe Louis, and it was a shame to see the way he ended, but great for Uncle Sam. That's how they treat a legend.
All right, mate, we hit our top 4, and number 4 is...
Well, he's had him before me, Peter Mike, Henry Armstrong, the first man to ever hold the featherweight, lightweight, and waterweight titles at the same time. He beat Barney Ross at waterweight, Barney Ross is a Hall of Famer, went back down to lightweight. He had a string of wins as a featherweight. He beat future world champions and former world champions. He fought the great Ray Robertson as well. He should have won the middleweight title. He beat the middleweight champion prior to that in a non-title fight, and then obviously a draw with Garcia. Non-stop pressure. Back then we're talking 4 weight divisions. No super bloody this or junior this or 5 belts of interims and regular and silver, gold and whatever crap that's in boxing today, which they're ruining the sport for sanction and fees. Henry Armstrong is just a true legend of boxing, cannot be in anyone's top 10. If he wasn't in any of your top 10, boys, and he better be in yours, Lyndon, otherwise I'm coming to Bendigo or wherever he at the moment, mate. Henry Armstrong is, mate, yeah, just, a guy that, as I said, held 3 division titles at the same time. It's unheard of.
All right, mate. Number 3.
Sugar Ray Leonard. I think Mike knows my personal favourite fighter. What can you say, mate? Olympic gold medalist. He beat Wilfredo Benitez. He knocked him out in the last round. Benitez is a Hall of Famer, 3 division champion. He loses the fight to Roberto Duran, but then rematches him not long after that. No muss, as we all know. He goes up and he fights the unification fight. In my opinion, the best welterweight title fight of all time against Thomas Hearns. Thomas Hearns, I think Detroit City betted their whole life on Thomas Hearns, a hitman with his power, but Ray Leonard stops him in round 14. A great effort after being hurt with a swollen eye. And his cornerman, Angelo Dundee, saying, "You're blowing it, son. You've got to show me something." So he done it. He goes up again. He beats, as I said, the great Ugandan, Kalule. And then, he ends up, I think, 5 division champion. Donnie Leyland as well. Goes up Hagler. So I think Mike mentioned he was retired for 3 years. I can add to that. He only had the one fight in 5 years. He came back and had a fight, got knocked down, won the fight, and then he goes back in retirement. So 1 fight in 5 years. Fights Marvin Haggler, who's undefeated in over 10 years, arguably the greatest middleweight of all time. And he puts on a boxing masterclass, and I think he done everything he had to do against Hagler that night, and baited him and won the fight convincingly, in my opinion. There is controversy, but I thought he won it. Rematches Hearns later, has a draw. Rematches Duran beats him. And the only losses towards the end, he's past his best. He's gone. Terry Norris and Hector Camacho. Camacho wouldn't tie shoelaces up. Ray Leonard, pound for pound, as I said, I got him where I have because that's how much respect I have for the man. Period.
Fair enough, mate. Which takes us to number 2.
Muhammad Ali, my all-time favourite fighter, number 1 as a role model. Look, remember the fights against Cleveland Williams and people like that. They're the fights that I think of Ali at his best. I mean, he beats Liston. He has a series of wins, but people seem to think of Ali later on as Fraser and Foreman. I tell you now, before the war, before they robbed him of 3 years of his life, where he couldn't box in his prime, I think between 27 to 30, which is prime years, nobody beats Ali. No heavyweight. Lewis, Tyson, I don't care who you want to mention. The Ali before the post-war, no one beats him. The Ali that fought Cleveland Williams and guys like that can't come near Ali. Yes, later on, he comes back and has the fight of the century against Fraser, loses, beats Fraser twice in rematches. Phil Manila, as we all know, famous. Beats Ken Norton 2 out of 3. Does the unthinkable Rumble in the Jungle against Foreman. Beats guys like Ernie Chavez and big punching guys, Ernie Terrell, Oscar Bonavides, all these guys. I mean, even Joe Bugner is a great boxer. Ali beat everyone. And as I said, he rematched everyone. He lost to Leon Spinks, even though he's past it. Comes back and beats him. Ali post-war, no one touches him and goes undefeated for the rest of his life, in my opinion. And he changed boxing. He changed the voice of black people in general. Michael Jordan's, everyone gets more money because of Ali. No Ali, there's no Jordan, there's no black superstars because he gave them a voice. He showed them they can be their own person.
Well said, mate. Which brings us to number 1, and probably again no surprises here.
Yeah, Sugar Ray Robinson. Look, don't take it from me or Mike or Peter. Joe Lewis said that he was the best ever. Ali said he's the best ever. I've heard Gene Tunney, Max Schmeling, legends on the great pound for pound, which you have all probably got on video at home, you guys. They've all said he's the greatest ever. I mean, what was he? 100 and something, wins before he lost to LaMotta, rematched LaMotta. I think they had 6 fights. He knocked LaMotta out in their last fight. No one ever done that to LaMotta. He beats everyone at waterweight. He beats Kid Gavilan and legends like that. He goes up and he beats guys like Bubba Olsen. He goes up to middleweight. Said he beats LaMotta. Lou didn't think he could do any style he wanted to. He had years off the sport, came back. Ray Robinson, look, I'd near fight to the death if anyone said he wasn't the best pound for pound. So, yeah, he's just the greatest ever. Simple.
All right, mate, there's your top 10.
So we got Julio, Cesar, Chavez, Mexican legend, 10. Pernell Sweet B. Whitticker, number 9. Thomas the Hitman Hearns for Detroit, 8. Willie Pep, the best defensive fighter of all time, greatest featherweight, 7. Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran from Panama, number 6, the greatest lightweight of all time. Joe Louis, a brown bomber, in my opinion, the second best heavyweight to Ali. Henry Armstrong, what can we say? Held three divisions at one time. Sugar Ray Leonard, the greatest fighter of the 80s. Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight of all time. And Sugar Ray Robinson, pound for pound, the number 1.
Good stuff, mate. All right. Well, that gets a bit of feedback there. What do you reckon, Pete?
Yeah, look, the questionable ones are obviously Thomas Hearns, but Thomas Hearns, for mine, was the best welterweight of all time. I think at welterweight he destroys everyone, and he went up and won 5 world titles, 5 different weight classes. He gets a pass. Whitticker, for mine, was the best defensive fight I've ever seen. A guy could sneak under your kneecaps. It was unbelievable. His Achilles heel is Julio Cesar Chavez, and that's for a number of reasons. I mean, his draw with Pernell Sweetwee Whitticker was a joke. Whitticker gave him a lesson. Anyone that scores out a draw, please rip up your boxing pads. Also, the fact Melrick Taylor and that stoppage with Richard Steele with only a few seconds to go, that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth as well. It was 2 seconds to go. Melrick Taylor was giving him a boxing lesson. So a real good boxer could expose Chavez. There's no way, for mine, he's in the top 10. That's just, he's probably in the top 25. I'll cop that. But he hasn't done enough to be in that top 10 for mine. He hasn't won multiple, world titles or done it. He's not the best lightweight of all time. There's nothing there that sticks for me. He comes in at 10. But the rest, I agree with. Thomas Hitman Hearns was my favourite fighter of all time, and he still is. Growing up, I love the Hitman. When he lost to Marvin Haggler, I was in tears just as a young kid. He was my idol. So I'm not going to, I fully, just Chavez for mine. If you've got a good slick boxer as Whitticker was and Melrick Taylor, you can expose him. That's just, and when he moved up in weight, he wasn't the same when he moved up and challenged guys. Yeah. So for mine, he wasn't a pound for pound guy, but he was a legend of Mexican boxing and definitely probably the top 25 fighters that have ever fought. But I don't see him as a top 10. That's just mine. I don't think there's a case there for him.
What about you, Mike?
I'll say a couple of things. I think also Thomas Hearns, one of my favourite fighters of all time. I think what shades him from being top 10 to, say, 15 to 20, probably on my list, is the 2 losses, the definitive losses to Iran Barkley.
That's what I was going to say, especially the knockout and then the split decision loss.
But I won't argue with it because of the Fabulous 4. From an optical perspective, I enjoyed watching Hearns the most. You touched on Whitticker and Chavez. Guess what? I got the Sports Illustrated magazine here. And look at what that says. Hopefully it's clear. Robbed. So we're not creating narratives here. That's one of the worst decisions of the 90s, and it deprived Whitticker. Similar to like we were talking last week about Fennick being deprived of victory against Azuma Nelson. That's the same. I think that I will say to Pete's argument on Chavez didn't make my list either. I understand what you're saying about him struggling with slicksters. My argument with Chavez would be that his feet slowed down considerably from about 1991, 92 onwards. If you go and watch him peak Chavez from probably 85 to about 89, he was very adept at closing range and closing distance, which is why he was able to beat guys like Roger Mayweather and Lockridge and Willie Pep and fighters. Even if he had trouble early in fights, he was able to adapt mid-fight, work the body, and constantly close range. As he got a bit older and he started slowing down, that's when, he started to get exposed a little bit against the faster, slicker guys. But I don't mind that one sneaking in there because, when you talk of Mexico's has delivered us so many great fighters throughout history. And when you talk of the greatest Mexicans of all time, it's a toss-up between Chavez or the great Ruben Olivares. So to see a Mexican represented on Taz's list, no problem with it. I always take umbrage to anyone that rates Ali above Joe Louis, but I understand because you're also measuring the greatness of Ali's persona and everything else that comes with it. So again, I'll sit here and argue with you all day that Joe Louis is a greater fighter, but in terms of impact, historical impact, Ali's had a greater historical impact.
Chavez, super featherweight, like as I said, from 90 to 93, he was voted Ring Magazine pound for pound best fighter. And who fought between 90 and 93? Great fighters. Like he slipped in on my end. As I said, I just thought that he at the peak as a super featherweight, then wins them, destroying guys like Hector Camacho. Camacho is a buddy. What a fighter Camacho was, and destroys him. And I just think that's why I've got him there. Can't have him above Whitticker because obviously I think of that draw. And Ali Lewis, as I said, both changed the landscape for African American fighters. I can't really separate them there of what they both done, but I think head to head if they fought, I think of Prime Ali, I don't think Lewis touches him. You're talking about Billy Con's getting wins over Joe Lewis. Well, Ali's not Billy Con. So that's
this is the way I see it, guys. This is the way I see it. Different diets, different eras. It's not fair to compare. I mean, these guys in the 30s, they were the toughest men alive. I mean, we're worried about coronavirus. These guys used to sign up, fraud their passports to get on the ship, and it was 99% you're not coming back home. You're going to come back, and they'd do it with a smile. They were different men. Lewis was the toughest of the tough. Okay, Lewis was 6'1". He was 190, 200 pounds. He was 90 kilo. In today's market, he's a cruiserweight. He doesn't shift in as a heavyweight. He can't go in against a 6'7", 250-pound guy. But I guarantee, if you put him in, he'd probably beat him because that's the type of guy he is. They were tougher, bigger guys. Now, Ali, I mean, he can fit in any era. He's like Wayne Carey. You put him in any era, and he adapts. Where Joe Lewis might have been like Big John Nichols. I mean, he's 6'2", he's Big Nick, but he ain't going to be a ruckman today up against, Nat Nui and these guys because they're going to be jumping all over him and running him all over the place. But it is what it is, and it's hard to compare. But both of them deserve to be in the top 10. And Joe Lewis, I mean, what he did with Matt Smelling for mine, that when you go into the history of that fight, it's just hats off to Joe Lewis. Yeah. And 200 pounds back in that day, 6'1" was a giant. Most people were small. I mean, AFL footballers ruckman was 6'2", 6'3". That's just the way we were back then. Who's to say with today's diets they wouldn't have grown bigger and have different physiques?
No, I thought it was a great list, mate. Very well.
Thanks for the feedback, guys. Cheers.
And, I'm pretty hesitant to actually have anything to say, because I'm up next, of course. So I will walk the plank, as they say. All right, guys, we'll go through this a little bit quicker. We don't want to keep everyone here all night, but my number 10, after our discussions this end, is Pernell Sweet Pea Whitticker, 1984 Olympic gold medalist, world champion in 4 different divisions, and beat the likes of Azuma Nelson, Greg Haugen, Jorge Paez, Buddy McGirt. Should have beat Chavez, obviously, but was ripped off. And then later on had the fights against De La Hoya, Felix Trinidad. I just think he was defined defensive masters. I think in a bygone era, it was Willie Pep. I think in our era, it was definitely Pernell Whitticker. So just love Sweet Pea. I think he just made a lot of fighters look stupid. I think we spoke before about when he fought Greg Haugen. Haugen could not lay a glove on him. I know Haugen's pretty limited, but he also went up against some other great fighters as well and made them look just ridiculous. So hats off to Sweet Pea Whitticker. I thought he was a great fighter, and he's in my top 10, well, ranked at number 10. Number 9, I've gone for the marvelous one, Marvos Marvin Haggler. I'm surprised that no one else actually had him in the top 10s. I know there's all different reasons for that, of course, but world champion for 7 years, 12 successful defences, beat the likes of Roberto Duran, Thomas Hearns, John Mugabe, one roll down, Mustafa Hamsho, and of course had the disputed fight against Sugar Ray Leonard. And I'm really looking forward to maybe going over, revisiting that fight, because definitely open to interpretation. But just loved Marvelous Marvin Haggler. It was really sad way that he went out against Leonard. I thought he deserved better. There was talk about a rematch afterwards, but obviously never happened. But just loved watching Marvelous Marvin Haggler. So I've got him at number 9. Number 8. Well, I'll skip through this one because a lot of it's already been argued against. But I had Julio Cesar Chavez at number 8. Won his first 86 or 87 fights, I think it was. I know a lot of those, as you might say, Pete, might be bum of the month club, but end of the day, it's no different to fighters from yesteryear. His fights against the likes of Edwin Rosario, Roger Mayweather, Meldrick Taylor, Camacho, Whitticker, De La Hoya. I mean, he fought some great fighters. And I just think he's the number one Mexican fighter of all time. And look at their 107, 6-2 with 85 KOs, and just an absolute legend. And yeah, he did probably get exposed a little bit against some of those fleet-footed fighters, but the Meldrick Taylor one, and it's funny because I rate him highly because of that fight, because I know Meldrick Taylor probably won 10 out of the 11 rounds up to that, but the fact that he was able to dig deep and do what the likes of an Ali or a Robinson or these types of guys did, and actually pull one out of the fire that he had no right to win, I think that just really solidified his spot in my top 10. I just think he was a fantastic fighter, and you were never never safe against Julio Cesar Chavez. Number 7, Sugar Ray Leonard, 1976 Olympic gold medalist, world champion in 5 different divisions, Ring Magazine's 1980s Fighter of the Decade, and who can forget those fights with Hagler, Duran, Hearns, Benitez, the fellow kings of his era, and just an absolute legend of a fighter. So Sugar Ray Leonard, I think we've enough's been said about him by you guys, so I won't bore everyone else with the details. Number 6, Manos de Pereira, Roberto Duran, 103 wins, 16 losses, and 70 knockouts. And the thing is about those losses is a lot of them came later in his year at a much heavier weight. So won the world lightweight title at 21, also won world titles at welterweight, junior middleweight, and middleweight. And again, who can forget his fights with fellow kings, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Haggler, even Wilfred Benitez, and even at lightweight, there was Ken Buchanan and Esteban de Jesus. So just loved watching Duran. He was one of my favourite fighters growing up, and just, an absolute legend, not just in Panama, but all over the world. And you just got to see the response that he gets whenever he fights. Whenever he travels to fights these days, with the regard that he's held in. We go to number 5. Again, enough's been said about this man, Muhammad Ali. He's just, as he says, the greatest of all time. And, I did debate about whether putting him or Joe Louis in. I went with Muhammad because I tend to agree with Tazzy that I think if they did actually fight, that Muhammad Ali would be too slick and skillful for Joe, and he had a rock iron chin as well. So I'm not sure whether Joe Louis would have been able to hurt him like he knocked out a lot of guys back in the day. So Muhammad Ali for me, 56-5 with 37 KOs. We go to number 4, the great Manny Pacquiao, 62-8-2, 39 KOs. I think enough debate's been entered into this with Pete, with Mike and Tazzy. But look, I think the fact that he won so many, fights over so many divisions, world titles in whether it be 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10, whatever it might be. The fact is that, what a champion fighter, world champion in 4 different decades, which has got to be discussed as well or mentioned. And obviously fights against Barrera, Morales, Shea Mosley, Ricky Hatton, Miguel Cotto, Oscar De La Hoya, Juan Manuel Marquez, Floyd Mayweather. The list just goes on and on and on. And
we spelt his name wrong there, though, Lyndon.
Did
it's
I?
A-O, yeah.
What did I say there? Oh, sorry. Well, there you go. Is that just on mine or is that on all of them? Sorry about that.
No, on the list is A-I-O. It's
okay. All right.
It's
well,
A-O.
Okay. No. Well, 62, 8 and 2, 39 KOs, and as I said, I think you've covered him as well as could be, Pete, with your assessment. So I'll skip over him. Number 3, another one that's been assessed 3 times now. Henry Armstrong, just unbelievable record, 149-21 with 99 KOs. Featherweight world title 1937, won the world lightweight and welterweight titles in 1938. Only boxer to hold 3 world titles simultaneously, which obviously will never be done again. And lost a disputed decision actually for the world middleweight title. So it could have been 4 divisions. And also defended the welterweight title 19 times and beat 16 world champions. So again, enough's been said about Henry Armstrong, which brings me to number 2. I'll just cue the eye rolls here. I have Floyd Mayweather Jr. as number 2. I'll explain why. First of all, 1996 Olympic bronze medalist, world titles in 5 divisions, 26-0 in world title fights. Obviously beats the likes of Oscar De La Hoya, Canelo Alvarez, Miguel Cotto, Ricky Hatton, Marcus Maidana, Shea Mosley, Juan Manuel Marquez, Zab Judah, Chiro Gatti, and again, the list goes on and on and on. And the reason I've got him at number 2 is I just don't think it matters what era this guy was in. I think he's right up there with the likes of the Sugar Ray Robinsons of the world. I don't think it would have mattered whether he was 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. No one could touch this guy. And the fact he fought guys like Pacquiao, and I know, Pete, your argument's going to be when they fought. You've got to remember that Mayweather was past his peak as well. I know timing's everything, but the fact that he made Manny look a very, very ordinary fighter. He made Canelo look absolutely ridiculous. He made other fighters like Hatton, Cotto, Mosley, you name it. He made them all look pretty silly along the line. So I just don't think there's any disputing the fact. Well, I'm sure he will dispute it up next. But the fact that he made so many great fighters look very, very ordinary, I just think he ranks number 2. Just simple as that. So we can go over it in a minute. And number 1, again, no surprise, Sugar Ray Robinson. Again, look at that record, 174, 19-6 with 109 KOs. World welterweight champion, world middleweight champion. Unlucky to not to win the light heavyweight world title. Multiple defences, but just, as I said, you guys have probably covered him enough. So there's my top 10. 10 is Pernell Whitticker, 9 Marvos Marvin Haggler, 8 Julio Cesar Chavez, 7 Sugar Ray Leonard, 6 Roberto Duran, 5 Muhammad Ali, 4 Manny Pacquiao, 3 Henry Armstrong, 2 Floyd Mayweather Jr., and number 1 Sugar Ray Robinson. So let me have it, guys. I think you maybe cop it last week with my selection with Jeff Horn at number 10. Let's go with Floyd at number 2, which I'm assuming is the one you want to talk about. Come on, Tassie.
Come on, Tassie.
Look, I forgot to mention at the start of my list that I had it like the Hall of Fame. I didn't put anyone in that hasn't been retired for at least 10 years, which that's why Manny or Floyd weren't in my argument. So I ruled them out. That was my basis. I should have mentioned it at the start of my list. So I'm a bit like the Hall of Fame. Had to be retired for 10 years. So Manny's still active and Floyd had retired a few years ago. Lyndon, as I said, you got Whitticker, you got Chavez like me. Hagler, why didn't we all have Hagler? Look, for me, Marvin was amazing, but Marvin's biggest marquee wins were over small guys. Was he unlucky not have big middleweight names? But, I mean, the wins over Duran, who was small, who barely got away with that fight. Hearns, he destroyed Hearns, full credit there. The other one's Leonard, and I don't think the controversy, I've watched it many times. If you're a boxer, you'll like Leonard. If you're a bit of a brawler, you'll like Hagler. Hagler, I don't know why he didn't fight southpaw earlier. He's come out right-handed, which Leonard was having trouble with southpaws in training camp. So, look, Hagler, he deserves a mention. God rest his soul too. I was very upset to hear his passing. But I think, I don't know if you boys agree with me, I think, the only big names he had were smaller guys, besides Mugabe, but, really, is he a massive name, really? I mean, I've got no problem with Mayweather. I wouldn't have him that high.
Welcome back, Mike, by the way.
What? Yeah, what's that?
No, we lost Mike.
My phone.
You back, Mike?
I'm going to say that was the soul of Willie Pep and Harry Greb reaching through my phone and denouncing your list. Harry Greb beat the welterweight world champion. He was the reigning middleweight world champion, beating the reigning light heavyweight world champion, the reigning heavyweight world champion. That's still not good enough to make your list.
Sorry, Mike. No, well, you can only get 10 on the list. That's the thing. And, as I said, I think you're never going to get it right. But I just think those fighters there, I think Floyd Mayweather would have stood up in any generation, whether it be, as I said, 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
I agree with that.
And I think Manny Pacquiao would as well. And that's why they're up there. And I think the fact that, look, I think Floyd's legacy's been tarnished a little bit by, the events of the last couple of years with McGregor and the YouTuber and all the rest of it. But I think, as I said, I just think ability-wise and achievement-wise, he beat so many, like 26-0 against former world champions. I mean, that's just unbelievable, And I know he got them all at different stages of their careers, but at the end of the day, he beat them. And I think you'd look at all different champions of different eras. They got fighters at different times. And we ranked Rocky Marciano very, very highly in the heavyweight division based on fights, wins over Joe Louis and Jersey Joe Walcott and Cesar Charles. And I'm sure we can debate that at another time. But I just think the fact he made so many good fighters look very, very ordinary, including Manny Pacquiao and Canelo and all these types of guys.
Marquez.
Yeah, exactly. Marquez.
He beat Marquez easy.
Castillo was one that I know it's disputed about.
Yeah, but let's go back to the Marquez.
Yeah.
That was at 145 pounds.
Yep.
Marquez was a lightweight, and he comes in, bang, 147 and says to Marquez, I'll give you 500K.
Yep.
Now, that's Mayweather to a T, okay? Didn't stick to the agreed weight, didn't stick to the contract weight, no respect for his opponent. We saw him against Castillo. Did he win that fight? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Where does Castillo fit? Not top 100.
Yeah.
Against De La Hoya. Where do you put De La Hoya?
Yeah.
De La Hoya was washed up when he fought Floyd.
I
Look,
think,
Floyd is the best managed fighter. You can't have him at number 2. It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous.
No, look, I think the Castillo one you can wipe because all great champions of different eras have struggled with a fight here or there that maybe shouldn't have really been anywhere in the ring with them. So I think styles make fights, as they say. But at the end of the day, you've just got to go by his record. 26-0 against current or former world champions or future world champions. And I just think, as I said, he stands up against any of those guys. I really do. I think we tend to let our personal opinions get in the way of what we think of him sometimes. But I just think, in my opinion, I thought it was actually a pretty easy decision to have him at number 2. Just, Mike, come on.
Willie Pep and those guys, they're just, for mine, I couldn't even, Mayweather to Willie Pep,
it's really hard with those types of guys because a lot of the time we're going off what we see on paper. We're going off records and it's great. I know we go on box record and all that sort of stuff and we have some limited footage. But at the end of the day, really, really hard to judge those guys from back in the day because we're really going by hearsay and a few black and white clips. So that's probably why I haven't rated those types of guys like the Grebs and the Willie Peps and those types of guys a bit higher because it's just really, really hard to put them side by side and actually see them in black and white or in colour or whatever and to say, okay, what would happen if these guys fought? And as I said, from what I've seen, I just think Floyd Mayweather stacks up against any of those guys. It's probably a little bit of similar conversation you had with Manny. I think it was Tassie before. You had him at number, was it 3? So, I can see both sides of the argument. But for me, I just think Floyd Mayweather, for me, is the second best overall fighter of all time. It's just my opinion.
Go, Mikey.
I think, look, the problem we got in this era of boxing and why it's going to be hard to rate anybody historically is because of how diluted the sport has become.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's hard to put that in context. Sometimes you can overpunish, sometimes you can underpunish what the guys achieve. You're just talking about it with Pacquiao. Like, with Pacquiao, if you attribute him then world title claimant over Barrera, then you shouldn't attribute him the lightweight world title against David Diaz.
Yeah.
So you've got to pick your poison, and it doesn't mean that Pacquiao wasn't the best 135-pounder in the world at that time, because he was. But I think that that's what makes it difficult in the sport, and I think that that's why a lot of the traditionalists, as they say in boxing, are clamoring for there just to be one bout per weight class. We're not saying we need to go back to the 8 weight classes historically, but I think it's just because you want to see the best fighting the best. And I think that if you are going to have anyone from the modern era, collectively you guys have picked the right guys. It's got to be Floyd, it's got to be Pacquiao, it's got to be Roy Jones, and then after those guys comes, say, fighters like Bernard Hopkins and that. I think that what makes it hard stacking up this era is the business of the sport and how diluted the sport has become. And as for the other argument, the argument I'll denounce is, look, if I watch footage of a top 10 heavyweight now and Joe Louis, the top 10 heavyweight probably beats him every time. Different skills, different eras. You know, you can't judge Cristiano Ronaldo to Pele.
Yeah,
or any soccer players in the past. Sport evolves, athletes evolve, sports science evolves. So I think you've got to do it right, you've got to look at historically what was achieved and the context that it was achieved in. And it's a hard argument any which way.
Yeah, it is. I don't think there's any right or wrong. It's just different opinions. But as I said, like the definition of, you know, pound for pound best fighters of all time, it's probably a little bit like last week. Does it go down to the most talented? Does it go down the one who, you know, who achieved the most or won the most titles or fought the most world champions? It's just it's a really hard one to go by. But look, it just, I suppose sometimes you've got to go by your gut feel. And as I said, I just think in my mind there was no doubt that overall that I just thought Floyd Mayweather was the second best fighter of all time. And just like you thought with Harry Greb and Willie Pep and Benny Leonard. I mean, there's definitely one that could probably be debated.
Benny Leonard's a legend. I was going to put him in, but I didn't want to put too many. I wanted to be a bit more colourful. But Benny Leonard, what a fighter. I mean, it's a shame. He really is in the top 10. If I had to do an actual top 10 with old-timers, I'd put him in.
If I can give special mentions, it would be the Greb and Benny Leonard. That were my special mentions. Probably and Roy. And what about Hagler, boys? Peter and Mike, what do you think about Hagler?
I think with Hagler, where historically he gets punished is you can't deny his reign as middleweight champion. But you look at the context of who he beat. So he come in as a middleweight champion in the era post Carlos Monzon's retirement, and he beats Minter for the world title, and then defends against Antifermo. Then you look at his top challengers outside of smaller guys that are known. You got Mugabe, who went on to win a junior middleweight world title. You got Tony Simpson was one of his top challengers. Mustafa Hamsho twice. Fulgencio Obermejes twice, who became a future 168 world champion. The problem is that all of his defining fights come against Duran, Leonard, and Hearns, who are naturally smaller guys. And although they're great fighters, I think that's what works against him a little bit historically.
Yeah, that's my opinion too.
But sorry, mate, sorry to cut you off, but I mean, from that angle, you could almost say the same as Carlos Monzon. I know he didn't fight the smaller guys, but the quality of opponents probably wasn't around as much for him either. I mean, you look at his resume, and it's impressive, but I don't know, a lot of the guys on there didn't really do a lot before or after he beat them. So, and they've got that argument of one or the other. I just look probably a bit like Monzon. I look at Hagler, he had 12 total defences and fought just those great fights. And let's face it, Tommy Hearns ended up fighting at cruiserweight. So I don't think the fact that he was a smaller guy coming up, I think definitely Leonard and probably Duran, but I think Hearns was almost looked like the bigger man when they fought.
Yeah, and I was going to say, look, Marvin Haggler at middleweight he's one of the best fighters, one of the best middleweights of all time. Carlos Monzon, 14 title defences. I mean, I rate Monzon the best middleweight of all time, just from Marvin Haggler. But, I couldn't have Hagler in the top 10 for mine because he never been. I mean, if Hagler had gone on to super middleweight and light heavyweight and heavy, look, Hagler at middleweight to mine doesn't beat Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard beats him as he did, but then you even go to Roy Jones Jr. I think Roy Jones Jr. beats him at middleweight. A prime Roy Jones up against Marvin Haggler. On my money's on Roy Jones because he's beaten Tony and he's beaten Bernard Hopkins, and those guys had burial long range as well. So I can't see him in there in front of the others. That's just my knock on him, and nothing against him because he probably is in the top 2 or 3 best of all time middleweights.
Yeah.
But not a top 10 list for mine.
Yeah. All right. Well,
hey boys, I've got a question. I've got a question. Isn't it funny how, Rocky Marciano 49-0 and all this? It's funny how we don't even mention. I mean, it's obviously it's funny, isn't it? Not even a thought. I mean,
probably the Mayweather argument, mate.
He's 187 pounds though at 5'10.5". Yeah. So I mean that's.
No, I know. I'm not saying
and that's bulked up.
Yeah, but I think Tassie, it's the Floyd Mayweather argument too. I mean, he's 50-0, but does do undefeated records mean everything? For me, it doesn't. And that's not why I had him at number 2.
Oh no, of course not. Yeah.
And well, it could be a bit of a segue into maybe another one we can do where we can do the top heavyweights of all time. So I reckon that would be very, very entertaining to do the heavyweights. But plenty of debate there. But look, it's just, as we said it last week in the episode, it's no right or wrong. It's just opinions. And I think all those fighters on the list, no matter who they are, I think we can all agree that probably in the top 15, 10 to 15, every single one of them. So there it is. All right, guys, we'll probably have to leave it with that. We promised everyone we wouldn't go too long tonight. We've actually gone longer than last week. So, plenty of good debates there. So I really appreciate you being on board again, boys. Let's pencil in again next week. We might even do the heavyweights next week, or maybe revisit. Maybe we might revisit the Hagler Leonard fight, Tassie, and go over it with a fine tooth comb and see who really did win.
Now, why don't we do the top 10 heavyweights next Thursday, 7 p.m. again for the viewers?
All right. Done. All right. Okay. Sounds good, boys.
Right.
Well, thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for watching. I know we've had a couple of technical issues here by the looks of things, but all good. And thanks again, and we'll see you next week at 7 o'clock.
No, thanks, legends.
Don't leave the house, Mike. Don't leave the house, Mike, after 9 p.m. Okay, Mikey?
See you, boys.